Hello, everyone. This is just going to be a brief philosophical lecture, and today it's going to involve omniscience and some of the paradoxes involved in theological omniscience, as well as my proposed solution. Now, one common and clever and trail of the theological paradox involved in omniscience is that how can God know everything will happen to any given ontological being or entity or person? But then give them free will to allow them to not predestinate and make their own choices. So they're not just merely logically a puppet maker or puppet master of a watchmaker like theological system. So so the notion of designology in the Heideggerian sense, or what it means to be a concretion of pluralities of monads that psychophysically parallelize to the conduit structure of the mind. And I believe that when it comes to Meinongianism, I'm very much fascinated by it, and I very much use it often in my core questions. So I think that if omniscience in some sense is fully impossible, yet possible within Meinongian semantics, that allows, in some sense, omniscience to mergically be sliced, like a pie, for example, not the number pi, but pi. And that in itself means that in some sense, and in some possible worlds, in a very relativistic modality, that means um, that in some sense omniscience is possible, and in other senses it's purely restricted into the Meinongian realms of judgment and Kantian nominalities and phenomenalities as they appear in the categories of his prolegomena. So I think that, certainly, the notion of whether or not Meinongianism allows for the potentiality of all possible kinds of omniscience to simultaneously blossom or flower within the metapsychotic neurological fusions known as all the reality-scapes and story-scapes and the narrow-scapes that the human mind can ever tangibly perceive. And that becomes the notarial question of whether or not philosophy question ought to be very much like advanced Scrabble game, and namely the shuffling of combinatorial possibility, and that in itself allows the combinatorial possibilities involved in Meinongianism, and strictly its subset of theology known as omniscience, and therefore it becomes the theological impervious notion as to why theology exists rather than not exist in all possible worlds according to theologians, and that question is answered by the prime mover's intentionalism towards theological semantics that first became ideologized during some unknown past state of historical materialism or historical pre-idealism or pre-materialism in some pre-cosmogonic inflationary sense. And therefore, the ontological argument I propose for the compatibilism between omniscience and free will is that free will is restricted to physicalist realms of epiphenomenalism, whereas omniscience is a Meinongian semantic concept, and omniscience is only impossible when the concepts that God objectively dreams about are impossible, are Meinongian in every possible world, not just this world. And that in itself makes it semantically incredulous and vacuous and not imperishable to the threat of all possible ripples from awareness. But if you take into account an extreme maximal pandispenalism towards pandispenalism towards the metaphysical fluidity that is the Meinongian semantics throughout every possible and impossible world, then that allows God's Meinongian in some neurological slices to be possible and endeavor to be not possible or Meinongian, and therefore God cannot do everything unless everything includes Meinongianism, and that in itself is another good question. If everything includes Meinongianism inherently. But anyways, I hope that the conclusion is that, in some sense, the infinitely or many value logic of Meinongianism permits within factional group theory node that comprises the Minkowskian frames knitted escapes of every possible and impossible neurological bundle sheaths of Godelian worlds and omniversal worlds, and therefore omniscience can be compatible with the and emanationism, physicalism of free will. Um, I do want to thank you so much, and I hope this meets you well. Bye. Thank you.